Hello and welcome to this SharePoint Saturday Warsaw 2020 online edition. And welcome to my session, Become a Power Automate Hero with Dr. Flo. This is part 2. First, let's thank the organizer of this online event, and we hope that we will be back on-prem in physical location in 2021 to celebrate the 6th anniversary of the event. And in this session, I would like to share my experience of many enterprise projects with the Power Platform, where I've learned and I keep learning many things. So I would like to illustrate a few enterprise points, I would say. My name is Dr. Flo. I'm also known as Serge Luca. I work in Office 365 and more specifically in business application. I'm based in Brussels, in Belgium, and my company is called Power Platform Associates. So I've created a company together with another MVP, specialized in data, and Power BI, Isabel van Kempenhout. So so I did a previous session this year. You can see, I recommend you to watch this session. This session, the previous session, can be considered as part 1. So today in part 2, I would like to minimize the overlap. Of course, I will just take some element of the previous session, but I'd like to spend more time into enterprise concept, which is the BPM Toolkit, the Power Platform BPM Toolkit, which is an open source, a free open source tool that I've created to overcome some limitation that I've described in the previous session. Okay, so first watch the previous session. And just to go to the point, so in the previous session, I mentioned several limitations in the Power Automate. Like for instance, flow duration 30 days. And now my recommendation, at least that's what I do for myself, is I use the tool I've created, which is the BPM Toolkit, to overcome the 30 days limitation of a Power Automate. Same for the approval. So use the BPM Toolkit. Also, I mentioned, loops. There's nothing new with loop. There's nothing new with guest access. Regarding state machine and code reusability, also, what I do is I use the BPM Toolkit that I will describe in this session, of course. Okay, so also you cannot resume a flow. This is in the roadmap. You can use the BPM Toolkit. Okay, that's it for the overlap. Yes, I still have to show you something which is still very important, which is the architecture. So it depends on the kind of application you want to create, you need to create. But when you create enterprise application, and that's a good industry practice, right? It's not just for the Power Platform. You need to have a clear separation between the following layers, between the storage layer, the business layer, the UI layer, and the analytics, what I call the analytics layer, right? So I've described this slide in the previous session. This is very, very important. The application I'm going to show you follow this good practice, good industry practice, right? So we have most of the UI in this application is based on Power Apps Canva that talk to the flow, and flow talk to, in this case, SharePoint. So we store highly confidential information in the application. That means user cannot get to SharePoint and watch the information or update the information. It's completely confidential. So security is key in the business scenario that I want to illustrate later. Okay. So that said, I would like to also get back to two important patterns. Pattern between Power Apps and Power Automate. The first one, I mentioned that, which is elevation of privilege. If you remember, in the previous video, I mentioned that if you have Alex that talk to Power Apps that call a flow, and the flow is created with the flow service account, if this flow access SharePoint, who access SharePoint? Is it the flow service account or is it Alex? So the answer is it's Alex, right? So the flow identity the user identity flows through the layers, right? So the flow use actually the end user identity, which could be an issue in enterprise application because some storage layer are fully protected from the user. So you need some elevation of privilege, right? So, and the pattern that I mentioned is still valid, is that the user need to call a perhaps that call a flow, but this flow need to call a child flow. So when you call a child flow, and calling a child flow is part of the standard license, you don't need a premium license to do that. We have the run a child flow action. Actually, you break the permission inheritance if you want. So the user permission does not flow to the called flow. So the second flow, which is here, which is installed with the flow service account or created with the flow service account, can access SharePoint with the flow service account. So it's not Alex that access SharePoint, right? So also very important, but I mentioned that before, is that if this second flow use a premium feature, you don't need to buy a premium feature for all users. Okay. Well, it depends on the premium features that you are using. For instance, if you call the Word connector to fill in a Word template, dynamically generate a document, for instance, and from this document, this Word document can be transformed into a PDF, you need a Word connector. So you can buy the per flow license that cover the whole company. The cost is something like 480 euros per month for the whole company. So it's actually very interesting. And it cover up to 5 flow. If you want additional flow, you have to pay something like 83 euro per flow, per additional premium flow. Okay, so that's something very important. Okay. Also, when my UI call a flow, that call another flow to break or to provide some elevation of privilege, so to break the security barrier, this first flow, I call that the proxy flow. Okay, so the two flow have the same name, but the first one has the prefix proxy, something like that. Okay. Now, the second pattern I would like to illustrate is a generic way to submit information. So let's say you have 100 forms to create, and this form need to call a flow, and the flow will store information to the backend. If you want to be very generic, you can do this. So let's say this is in Power Apps. In Power Apps, you define an object, a record, with different properties, and you want to save that. So to save that, you have a button or something like that. You push the button, that call a flow, and you pass this information to the proxy flow. So here in Power Apps, you see I have the proxy flow. And in the proxy flow, you will see that, to be very generic, I use the the Power Apps JSON function, and I pass the object so that the flow will get all the properties in JSON. So you can analyze the flow, you can parse the JSON, and you can store the information into the backend, right? So this is my proxy flow called by the Power Apps. I pass the JSON. So this is the JSON. And this is the call flow, okay, the second flow called by the proxy one. And you can parse all the object properties and store that in your backend. So that's a very interesting way to have a generic backend flow. So I mentioned before that when you use Power Automate, so Power Automate is a very nice tool. I mean, I love it. It's a very nice way to have a glue between different applications. But there are some weaknesses that I mentioned before. Like if you want to implement some complex business process. And that's why I've created a BPM Toolkit. So, example. Let's say you want to ask 10% to approve something in sequence, right? So you can store the email of this 10% in a variable, which could be an array. And you can, in a flow, go through every person and send an approval. So create an approval and wait for an approval. and then you check the outcome of each approval. There are different problems here, because the first problem is, well, you know that a flow expires after 30 days. So that means after 28 days, if the whole process is not complete, you need to do something, call supervisor or do something, right? So that means if you write this, you will have to check, for instance, after 28 days, if the process is not completed, right? Otherwise, you notify the supervisor. Okay, so this is the pattern you need to follow. In many cases, that's good enough. I mean, keep it simple. Don't over complexify your application. But sometimes it does not work. It's not enough. The other issue is, let's say that at some point so you start a process, okay, so all the users are in the loop, you are in the for each, and you want to add an additional user. That's very complex because you are in the for each of the array, and well, you cannot change the array, right, dynamically. So that's not easy to perform. The array is read-only in this loop. There are other problems as well. Let's say that after 5%, you want to cancel the whole workflow, not just the approval, but the whole workflow, right? You want to cancel that. How are you going to do that? You cannot do that. In Power Automate, if you are using the account of the user who sent the approval, you can go to the Power Automate dashboard and you can say, I want to cancel this approval. You cancel one approval, but you don't cancel the loop. How can the system know that you want to cancel the whole workflow, not just one approval? Right? So, I mean, that's complicated. So we feel that we need something else. I mean, so I have different patterns, but still we need something else. Also, if you take a look at the approvals sent by Power Automate, they are too basic. Well, in many cases, they are enough, but they are too basic. You get something like this, you see, in your email. So people can, well, you can, of course, brand this, but people can click on approve, reject, they can put a comment. Okay, click submit, but that's it. I mean, that's not very sexy. Also, if you go to the approval center, you will see that people get that. I mean, they get the list of approval that they have to perform, list of receive, for instance. They click and they can say approve or reject. But I mean, we need more than that. Okay, so for many people, that's not enough. We need more flexibility. Okay, and recently another project, I had to work in another project with other requirements that pushed me to implement something new. Example, my customer want to re-implement the whole HR system. And in their case, they have something like 60 different type of HR requests, 7 workflow, that means seven business logic. Okay, so each HR request can follow different track, different business logic. It can go to many people before the request be approved. Sometime all approval can take up to 1 year. Most of the time it's less than 1 month. Also, people in the business process, like supervisor, user, or HR officer, want a visual way of the whole process. They want to see who did approve, who will approve, what are the next steps, what is the future. They want to be able to add new approver because sometimes we forget some approver. So after several weeks, we need to be able to add a new approver instead of stopping the whole workflow and restarting a new workflow. Also, people want to have a dashboard of all business process. They want to see all workflow in a visual way, in a graphical way. So also, if you take a look at one business process, the business process can be very complex. Example, you make a leave request for medical reason. So an employee make a leave request in Paris. First, this leave request must be validated by a doctor. And then we need to ask the legal department if this is a right or if it's just an option, right? Then it needs to be validated by a line manager, then by a first line HR in Paris, then by a supervisor in HR in Paris, and then by a supervisor in HR Brussels, and then validated by the director in Brussels. And then it's validated. And then people need to be able to talk to the person who submit the request, and sometimes the workflow need to get back to previous stages. So implementing that with Power Automate is virtually impossible. Okay, the process is too complex. It's too complex, but for many companies, that's actually very basic. That's normal. So some people are very surprised when you say, I mean, we cannot do that with Power Automate. Also, keep in mind that flow duration is 30 days, approval duration 30 days. Canceling a flow, only the approval requester can do that in Power Automate. You can create a custom connector to force canceling a flow, but using custom connector means you need premium license. You need to be able to redirect an approval, so have some state machine. Again, we don't have that in Power Automate. Only the user who gets the approval can redirect to another user. Supervisor must be able to redirect. Also, supervisor, so approvers, must be able to delegate their tasks. They want to be able to say, hey, if I'm not available, I want this guy to be able to take all my tasks. Okay, so that's normal. I mean, so we can implement a kind of redirection, custom redirection, but we need to create a custom connector. That's complicated, and again, that requires premium with Power Automate. So, and my customer did not want to buy premium license for 6,000 people. They want to use SharePoint as the backend for the data, okay? And they want something, I would say, free on top of that. Free but flexible and visual. So that's why I've implemented the Power Platform BPM Toolkit, which eventually will be open source and free. So you will be able to use that, okay? And this tool is based on the following pattern. That's a pattern, I call that the case management pattern, right? So the case management pattern is a pattern that allows you to solve many, many issues, not just this one. Like, let's say you have request, any type of request, not just HR request, any type of request. The requests will go to a life cycle, right? So any custom request will become a standard cases. It's a case because it has an ID, it has someone who submitted on behalf of someone else potentially, right? So there are some common feature to any request. So this is the perimeter of the BPM toolkit. So in BPM toolkit, I've defined a case entity, which is standard. So every request will become a case. So any request that you create will go to a case, in this case, a case SharePoint list. It could be a case entity if you use a common data service, but here we use SharePoint. And this case will have will go to different steps, different approval, for instance. Could be something different than an approval. So this case will have step 1, step 2, step 3. And then someone create a new request, could be an HR request or an incident request, or whatever. It will become a case, and the case will go through, will have a different life cycle. Okay? That means that with this tool list, case and case life cycle, you can implement something which is generic with or without the Power Platform, right? So I did it with the Power Platform. So, and the BPM toolkit data model is the following. You can recognize that people can create their own custom request here, for instance. Okay, so that's custom requests are requests specific to the customer business. But this custom request will be sent to the case list. And the case will go to the case lifecycle list. see? We have other lists like case delegation, we have workflows, we have team, we have roles, because security is very important as well. We have statistic, we have parameters, but basically these two lists are the kernel of the BPM toolkit. The architecture of this toolkit, because the toolkit is 100% based on the Power Platform, so it's a Power Platform enterprise architecture, is the following. The data at the moment are stored in SharePoint Online, but I will implement a common data service implementation, right? So I will provide this implementation later. The logic is implemented with Power Automate, but technically you can implement the same logic with Logic Apps. On top of that, we have core components. And in the core components, we have proxy flows. If you remember the pattern, the proxy pattern, this proxy flow are flow that can be called by the UI. Okay, but we have different submodules. Example, we have the case launcher. If you create a case automatically, the system will create steps, the different steps for your case. You can specify that this kind of case follow this kind of workflow, so the system knows how many steps and what kind of step the system has to go through, and it will generate steps. So we have workflow generator, case launcher, we have different modules like archiving, tracing, analytics, notification, task delegation, etc. And an abstraction layer on top of SharePoint Access layer, and then an abstraction layer on top of CDS. I still have to write these layers. On top of that, we have the UI. So I provide some basic feature as the UI, like a process dashboard that I will illustrate. But you can implement your own custom task form if you want. So you will see that. And so user can create their own custom request form. So each request will become a case. Okay. So this is the big picture. I don't want to be too boring, and I will give you a demo. So let's go there and let's illustrate the following HR site. Okay, so let's say that we have this website, and in this website people can create HR requests. So the first type of form I've created is the part-time request. When they submit their request, the request will be taken over by a workflow. So it will be approved and go through a complex life cycle. And people will be able to approve or reject and watch the dashboard, follow their request. So let's say I'm getting here, and this is Power Apps. And I want to create a part-time request, right? This is me. Okay, and then I want to do the following request. New request, for instance, or the reason. Okay, I will keep it simple. For instance, my wife is sick. Okay, I go there. I specify the time frame. I want to get a part-time from January 21 to January 22. Okay. Impact on my pension is 100%. Okay, a comment. I won't put any comment here. This is a summary of my request. I can go back, update the request, go forward. I can save the request as a draft, and I can directly ask that to approval. And of course, I have to confirm this, and then I have to specify an approver. So I will take myself as an approver. Okay, and then I will launch the workflow. I can add many approvers. If you have 10 approvers, the workflow will be dynamically be modify to take this approver into account. You will see that. So the system is submitting my request to the backend. I will show you the backend. Okay, it has been submitted. Okay, now it has been, the request has been submitted to the system. As a user, if I go to my dashboard, you will see that here, as a user, I can follow my request. So this is the request I did submit, right? And this is my dashboard. So I can filter all the requests. So I can filter requests that have been rejected, approved, that are in draft, that are stop. Okay. So these are the waiting requests, and you see that I have a graphical representation of my request. So at the moment it's here, it's orange. That means it's waiting for the HR support service to react, and then it will go to this guy. So it's myself. Normally I'm not supposed to be able to do that, but okay, that's for the demo. And then to the director, then the workflow will do something, which is actually generated document, and then to the first line support, first line supervisor, second line supervisor, and then it will be approve or reject, right? So that's the whole business logic. And in the dashboard, I can check all my tasks because some people can ask me to approve or reject something. So here I don't have any task yet. I can also delegate my tasks to another user. So I can say, hey, I want to delegate my task to the following user, user 1, click OK. Okay, so anytime a business process send a task to this to myself, it will be automatically be redirected to this user, right? So this is the user dashboard, which is something that we don't have in Power Automate, even though everything is implemented with Power Automate and Power Apps. Okay, of course I can check my request, I can edit my case. Okay, if you click there, you will be redirected to Power Apps, and you will be able to update the information if you need it. I can, of course, stop the whole business process, stop my case. Okay, so I don't want to do that. I can visualize it and so on. So that's for any end users, right? They can follow, they can track their request. Now, if you are HR, you need to act on the request. Okay, so HR area. Yeah, I forgot to mention that actually this you will see that this replaces also the Power Automate Approval Center. You will see that when I will get a request to approve, and you will see that I will get a new task here. Okay, I will get back to this later. So this is what HR see. So HR can see all the requests in the company. Okay, so for instance, this is the request I've done. So I'm a member of HR, so I can see that. I see that Serge Luca did send the following request. Okay. And that now the request, the business process is in running mode, is waiting. So we need to act on this, and that it's waiting on the first steps here. So if you're a member of HR, you can see this dashboard. And if you're a member of HR, you can click on this specific workflow. You can visualize it like this, and you can act on this. Okay, we have our different steps here, and we can act. For instance, I'm member of this group, HR support service, if I click here, you will see that my role is, these are my rows. So I've part of many rows, like HR support service. That's why I can accept or reject the following task. Okay. So if I do this, the system will go to the next step. I need to provide a comment, and then the system will ask the next guy to approve or to reject. You see, now this step is green. That means it has been approved, and it will transition to the next one. It can take a while. Okay, here we go. Now, as you can see, the system moved to this one. Okay, I can even, as an HR, I can check the comment here. Okay, it's fine. And now you see there is a clock. It's orange. That means the system is waiting for Serge Luca to react. As a matter of fact, Serge Luca is myself. So if I go back to my dashboard, I should have a task. You see, so in my dashboard, I can check my cases. So the case I submit, my task, my delegation. So this is my task. Okay. So as an approver, I can check the request detail. Okay. I'm the guy who did approve. That's why I can even edit the case. And as an approver, I can say yes or cancel, for instance. Great. All right. Then you don't see the approval anymore here. You see, so it's very similar to the Power Automate Approval Center, but in a more sexy way because I have more option here. I have delegation, for instance. So if I go back to the graph, you will see that normally the system will go to director. Okay, so this is green. It will go to the director. Okay, now the director gets a request. So the director can, so I'm HR, so the director can approve or reject. So let's say the director is not there anymore. And as member of HR, I want to skip this step. So I can do this. I can, for instance, skip this step. So the system will go to the next step. Or I can say, oh, I want to redirect to a previous step or another step. A next step could be a next step, for instance. So you can say, hey, I want to get back to 0. So you can say, hey, let's go there, and I want to go to step 0. So you will see that the system will go back. And here we go. So technically that means we did a goto, right? So it's a state machine. So we did implement a state machine by using Power Automate on top of Power Automate, right? So the system is there. And now you're a member of HR, you can say, hey, I want to go to, yeah, let's say I want to add a new step, right? So let's insert a new step dynamically. I want to say, I want to add the steps to this guy. For instance, I will go to user 1. Yeah, let's assign that to user 1. You will see that the new step will come here, and the other step will have a new number. Okay, this is user 1. We have a new step here. That's interesting, right? So you can also redirect to the future. So I want to say, I want the system to go to step 5 or step 7. Redirect to step 7. Here we are. That's fine, right? And of course, now I can accept you must be able to provide a comment. And you will see that eventually it can take a few seconds to perform, that eventually the whole process will be approved. Yeah, here we go. You see, approved. Okay, so we can stop, we can delete a business process. People can, when the business process is running, people can add messages to the other teams, to the other members that handle the business process. So, yeah. So basically, in this dashboard, HR can filter on only the approve request, on the waiting request. They can search on the stops, on the rejected, you see. So this is fully interactive. So this is completely written with Power Apps and Power Automate. There's no time limitation. A business process can take whatever. There's no limitation. You don't have any flow waiting for something. I mean, no running flow. That's we provide a different implementation. So an approval can take, I mean, whatever you want to perform along 1 year or 2 years. There's no limitation either. So most of the limitation, so state machine, we have state machine. Most of the limitation I mentioned before have been implemented in the BPM toolkit, right? And there's more to come. So now your question is probably, oh, does that work? Two things, the data model and the code. So the data model, if I go there, so I have a SharePoint site. And in the SharePoint site, I have one list called cases. Okay. And for every type of request, you have to create a different SharePoint list because we have different columns, different fields, of course. It's like an entity. Like for instance, if I show you the part-time requests are stored here. And when user submit the part-time request, the request is automatically secure by a flow, right? So we use unique permission. So only the user or the person who submit the request on behalf of the user or the people who will approve will be able to visualize this data. They cannot edit that directly in the SharePoint list, but they will be able to see the data. Okay. So of course, when you create a request, the request has an ID, and the request will be copied by the system automatically into the standard, the BPM Toolkit case list. Okay, so we have different cases here. And each case will be copied to the case lifecycle list. If you remember the pattern I show you, there is a case lifecycle, and there will be a set of rows that will be generated for every step of the workflow. So, for instance, if you create a part-time request, somewhere you need to specify, and I will show you where, that there is a part-time request workflow associated with that. And in this workflow, you need to define the logic of this workflow. And the workflow will, at runtime, generate step here. That's actually what you saw in the Power App application in dashboard. You saw the different steps. And that means if you add additional steps or if you remove steps at runtime, you will see that on the dashboard because the dashboard analyzes the data associated with your steps. So the question is, where do you define the workflow logic? The workflow logic is defined in the data. So I've defined a table called meta workflow. And for each type of request, I define the logic of the approval. For instance, for this request, the approval will be the following. First, it must go to the HR support service. Next, it must go through all the actors that the system will provide. That means when you submit the form, if you specify that the approver are, for instance, 7 person, you provide the name of 7 person, then this will be replaced by 7 steps, right? All the actors will come here. Followed by the director, then there are some custom things that need to be done here. We have some document generation that happen here. And then first line support, first line supervisor, second line supervisor, etc. If you want, you can even provide some loops here. For instance, you can say, if this group of people, because if there's no email address, it's not a person, it's a group of people. This group of people provide a feedback, and the feedback is negative, then go to this line, second line supervisor, which is here, this one. We don't know in advance which step will be this one, because dynamically you can remove step or add new step. You see, you can skip step, you can add new step, etc. So you can say, go to this actor, and the system will automatically go to the actor. So we have code that analyze this and that generate steps for you in this case lifecycle. Okay. Now let me show you the code, because there are many other lists. Like for instance, you need to specify who play which role, etc. So everything is based on roles. But let me show you the code. So we'll go to Power Apps. Yes. So I have one solution here, which is the BPM Toolkit. Of course, if you use that in another project, you need to create a solution for the other project, right? So next to the BPM Toolkit. But this is what will be shared on GitHub. So if you click on this, you will see that I have a bunch of flows and Canva apps. You see, like for instance, the workflow dashboard that I show you that allow, in this case, HR to follow the approval process is actually a Canva app. Works very well. Okay, so this, the business process dashboard is this Canva app, right? Based on gallery, and we have gallery containing galleries, etc. But that works very well. Same for the personal dashboard. If you go to your personal dashboard, you will see that it's actually a Canva app. And of course, Canva apps that call flows. Okay, so this is a Canva app, and when you click somewhere, you call a flow. Okay, so for instance, let's say you ask for stopping a business process. There is a button somewhere. When you click on the button, yeah, it's probably this one. Yeah, we call the BPM Toolkit workflow, as you can see here. Okay, so I still have to rename all the components here, but that's how that works. So we have a bunch of workflows, and you can see that the flows are the following. So there are many workflows. We have a bunch of proxy flow and flow. For instance, we have a act on task proxy that called act on task flow, etc. So you will always see this duality between the proxy and the normal workflow. And let's say when a case is created, automatically we have a flow. This one is very important, which is the case launcher. And the case launcher will analyze the type of case and the type of request, because a case is linked to a request, and we'll try to find the meta workflow, you see. So this launcher start when a new item is created in the case list, but we have trigger condition, of course, somewhere. And this one we'll call the workflow generator. So we have a workflow step generator. Okay, that check the different type of request of case. Actually, most cases can use the same workflow definition. So we call the workflow generator, and the workflow generator, let me show you where it is. Yeah, this is the meta workflow generator. The meta workflow generator analyze the workflow definition that I did provide in my SharePoint list and generate the steps, and of course secure the steps. So security is very important because we use unique permission here. So the system generate steps in the case lifecycle. So create item in the case lifecycle and secure the item and increment step number in the SharePoint list. So there are many other flows in this application. I don't want to be too boring, but right, there are many of them. Like for instance, redirect to steps. We have delegation, workflow. We have workflow that manage security. You can secure a step, you can secure a case, because when you create a case, all the people who are in the pipeline must be able to access the case and the request associated with the case. So managing security is complex. You need to secure all pipelines of people. If you add a new person in the workflow, if you dynamically add a new step, so you potentially add a new person, this person need to be able to get access to the request, okay? Because she need to be able to visualize the request, at least in read mode. So voila. So this was a very quick overview of the BPM toolkit. This is not used in production yet, so it's still in test with 2 customers. We need to deploy that next month to production, or maybe in 2 months, and then I will move that to GitHub. Okay, but I think this solves many issues in a nice way, secure way. It's generic, so you will be able to use that out of the box if you want. And well, the implementation can give you more idea to do something else or something similar. That's my goal. And it is a very challenging project. I believe that we've reached the end of this session. I really hope that you have enjoyed. And if you need any additional information about what I've shown, don't hesitate to ping me. Thank you very much.